Good morning, viewers. Welcome to this exciting edition of Community Power Masterclass Series. Today we are so excited to discuss about social movement building, and we have one of my best friends in this sector, and we welcome him to introduce himself. Welcome.
Hey. Good everybody. My name is Amaha Selassie out of United States, Dayton, Ohio, and I'm part of Co-op Dayton, where we focus on community wealth building. So we build cooperatives and a cooperative ecosystem. You know, we have a grocery store, a maker space, a mushroom farm, and another farm. And then simultaneously, we focus on movement building, you know, where we try to like make meaning and how do we like organize and base build in the community to build something called a solidarity economy, which is how we combine community transformation, or like what is the hope that we're trying to go for, and then economic development, like what is the engine to help drive us to where we're trying to go.
Thank you, Amar. And I think we must ask ourselves, why are we so much concerned about social movement building in this world where we should be focusing about economic growth and development? What is so crucial about social movement building, and why is this necessary for us to be active in such movements?
Yeah, you know, so to me, like, social movements are a part of, like, how we create change, you know, and there's a couple different ways that can happen, you know. Some change can be, though, how do we transform the current system and structures to create different outcomes, you know what I mean? We want more equity, we want more justice, greater sense of peace, you know. And then there's also, how do we build alternative systems and structures, you know, that and we use our energy to build the new.
Yeah.
You know, and so I think both have a role. You know what I mean? I'm a part of a formation called Resist and Build, where we do both. You know, but for me personally, I try to center myself now more on what are we building. You know, that like one of the best ways to make the current reality or the status quo obsolete is by building a new compelling, you know, something so inspiring, so compelling to like our deep heart desire.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That like, I don't even want that water no more. I want this new water that is emerging as we learn how to live more human together, I would say, you know what I mean, with all the environment.
Thank you, Amar, for giving that perspective that we need to have to build alternatives and give the views on how we can build workable ways of doing things rather than trying to fight some of these changes. There's a case where we've seen people fighting the status quo. Do you have any cases where they spin extreme or the challenges of fighting the system, and you've got some chances where the activists in that particular section get hurt or get armed in the process?
Yeah. I mean, I've definitely seen, people, you know, pepper sprayed or tear gassed or, you know, harmed in other ways, you know. You're making me think about something. So during the Black Lives Matter movement, and it's kind of earlier days, you know, there was, in my own area, we had a tragic killing of John Crawford III, who was shot in 0.2 seconds inside of a Walmart, you know. Yeah. At the same time, we had the tragic murder of Mike Brown. And, you know, at the time, like how I got to where I am today is because we were just doing all we could to try to fight for justice, and, you know, we were doing protests and we're doing all of these things, but we weren't doing anything to help build community. Yes. You know what I mean? So we would just have action, and we never had a space where we're actually building what we want to see. We kept just focusing on what we did not want to see. You know what I mean? Yeah. But the power is in what do we actually want to see? Like, what are we trying to build? You know what I mean? Because like, what are the gifts and talents that we have that we can use to contribute to the future that we all want to inherit?
Yes. I think there's a lot of challenges, particularly the frontline movement. Protest, when you do protest, and And when we were having some conversation out there, you said there's a case of a person who committed suicide.
Yeah.
Because can you highlight about that without even mentioning the names? Or
Yeah. So out of the wake of that like period in movement history, I had two very close friends that committed suicide. You know, and out of that, we started to realize the need for community care.
Yeah.
You know, that like, how are we building systems of care? How are we holding each other? How are we acknowledging that it can be very stressful to be on the front lines, you know? And so it showed us that like, there's more to this because, you know, we need to learn how to take care of ourselves. Like you know, at the time there was conversations about like individual care, you know, self-care, you know what I mean? But there wasn't enough, it was like an emerging idea about like, hey, how do we hold each other? You know what I mean? Like how do we create systems to make sure, you know, people are eating, people are resting, you know, that people are taking care of themselves and we're taking care of each other, that we can be, you know, strong enough to sustain, you know what I mean? Because if not, we can get burned out and get put into, you know, dangerous mental spaces.
Thank you, Amma. I think one of the challenges we have in the movement building is when we have external influenced conversation or external influenced protest on an issue that does not get sustainable in the long run, and you find some of the movement gets off the hook, gets off the line when they are doing this protest. Maybe tomorrow they are doing this protest. Yeah. What view can you give on about that?
Yeah, you know, like I don't know if it's necessarily movement building, but I think even just like organizing in general.
Yeah.
You know, that traditionally, you know, sometimes the topic or the collective hope that we're organizing around, and collective hope I mean as like, what is the shared idea of like this of what we want to achieve that is so compelling or inspiring that we're willing to put our gifts towards making it happen.
Yeah.
You know, and oftentimes funding determines what we organize around.
Yeah.
You know, and so a funder will say, "Hey, we will give you funding if you focus and organize around." Access to healthy food, you know, and then so you do that and you tell the community, you know, this issue is important, you know, and then all of a sudden that money dries up, and then another funder comes and says like, hey, if you will do something about prison reform, then we will give you money. So then you go out into the community, like, you know, I know we said this was important, but now prison reform is important, you know, and so the lesson that myself and others are learning is that like we can't allow external money to shape the direction that we're going to go into. You know, when as a community we understand what are the experiences that we have in common that we do not want. You know, because part of the thing is that sometimes we think we're experiencing something in isolation, and so it's just me. But when I realize, oh, my whole community is experiencing this same thing, then it's like, okay, what are we going to do to address it? You know, and after we identify that, the thing that we're going to change, or the thing that we don't want to see no more, or everything that we aspire to, then we just focus in on that. And if there's money, great, and if there's not money, great. You know what I mean? We keep moving and we keep pressing towards the thing, you know, because the more you step in that way, the more resources and opportunity can come. And I think like it's an interesting, deeper question, right? Is that we are our greatest resource.
Yeah.
Meaning that like the gifts that we have amongst us, you know what I mean, we're often taught to minimize, you know what I mean? But like our power is in our ability to bring our gifts together. We're talking about community power, collective power, you know? And it's also our best way to create opportunity. Like I used to think opportunity, I'm a sociologist, so I get nerdy sometimes, but we used to think that like opportunity was built inside of structure, meaning that like how they arrange resources would create concentrated advantage or concentrated disadvantage, you know what I mean, by design, you know what I mean? But while that is true,
Yeah.
we can also create opportunity by bringing our gifts together. Like even right here, we're doing this right now. If we're bringing our gifts together, and we created the opportunity.
Yes,
you know what I
yes,
mean?
yes,
And
yeah.
so it's like knowing that we have the power to co-create opportunity. You know what I mean? Gives us more hope, which then leads to more action. Because like the more we understand the power that we have to shape the environment around us, or even to name the future that we want to inherit, to be able to name our conditions, it gives us the ability to act.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? And so the power to define is a crucial part in all of this.
Thank you, Amma. I think you're giving us very, very crucial perspective. And I must recall that the social movements we had in Africa that led to independence of many countries was more of organically organized. It wasn't supported from the external funding. And we've seen even the civil rights movement in the US and the anti-racism movements and the current movement here in Kenya, where we had people organizing and saying no to government corruption, government poor governance. When the citizens take the power and become active, the movements become more stronger and more grounded. So I just wanted to ask you, in movement building, there are some challenges we found on the way. What are the critical tips can we advise the social change makers to create and have strong movement, grounded movement? What can they do?
I
quick
appreciate
tips.
that. I would say one of the biggest things is integrity.
Yes.
Meaning that whatever it is that we want to achieve in the world, that we seek to embody it ourselves. You know what I mean? I like to call it like being the invitation. You know what I mean? Because like I used to be like, hey, when you change and you change and you change, we're gonna all, you know what I mean? And then one of my elders one day, I got real frustrated because we kept going to different communities organizing, and then like we would agree on something, and then the next week they hadn't done anything. Which at first was no problem, we'll just do it again. But after a while, they hadn't, And my elder was like, well, how bright is your light shining?
Yeah.
And it shut me up because I started to realize like I need to create the space to practice whatever it is we're trying to achieve.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so like, the process is so important, you know what I mean? And so whatever it is, like how are we practicing it ourselves? You know what I mean? Because not only does that increase our legitimacy, you know what I mean? But it also shows that another world is possible.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And the biggest hindrance sometimes is that like, I don't know if what y'all saying is actually going to happen or if it's real. You know what I mean? And so like the more that we can live small examples of the possibility, the more people can like have that hope that it's possible on a larger scale. Another one I think is like being more decentralized.
Yeah,
that like, we want leaderful movements, where we're encouraging the leadership of everybody. Everybody can be seen as a leader, as a developer, as having gifts to contribute, you know what I mean? And in certain contexts, I think it's very relevant because of patriarchy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That like all of a sudden, like, like if we look for only men for leadership or as knowledge creators, you know what I mean? We leave like over half of a resourceful, full of potential and capacity of the women in our communities are seen, are left out of the picture.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so it's like, how do we create a space where we acknowledge all the gifts and talents, right? Because ultimately, you know what I mean, to get to a place where we acknowledge human dignity, it's going to be by acknowledging, well, one way is to acknowledge the gifts.
Thank you. You are getting so deep, and I think we have to get it very clear that we've seen emerging ways of building movements, and I must agree that most social movements which are using the open source approach in terms of leadership, agreeing on the goal and making it move, there is a lot of potential for growth than having a movement which we have leaders who want to to post, to show off that they are the leaders of movement. Such kind of movement will not survive. Do you have some perspective on this? And what can you advise leaders who want to claim authority and they don't want to get others on board?
You know, I think there's power in collective decision making.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And you know, sometimes the process is slower. You know what I mean? Like, but what I found is that like our willingness to go slow actually enables us to go faster later, right? Because movements move at the speed of trust. You know what I mean? And so it's like exploiting all areas of agreements. You know that like if there's 10 decisions on the table, and everybody only agrees with one, you know, don't let the 9 that we don't agree upon hinder us from or stop us from advancing on the one that we do agree upon. You know what I mean? Because ultimately, I'm what's called a public sociologist or like a action researcher. And so in that, we want to act to learn and learn to act. So there's all this knowledge that comes when we actually move, when we actually act. And so it's like, how do we keep acting that we can learn and we can there's a saying of make the road by walking it. You know? And so like how do we create this road together?
Yeah, there's something you said, and in one of the sessions when we had some of the discussions, and you said there's something about depth over speed. What did you mean about that? And I like that.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, I got that from one of my elders. You know, so. Yes. So the deeper dialogue, right, is that we have been operating in a world that values transactional relationships. You know what I mean? That I do for you, you do for me.
I pay you.
What can I extract from you? You know what I mean? All of these things, right? But when we ground ourselves in being relational, you know what I mean? Ubuntu, you know what I mean? I am because you are, you know what I mean? Then our advancing is by the depth of our relationship, or the stronger the connectivity is amongst us. You know what I mean? And the deeper we go, the farther we can go. You know, because we can't even cooperate and collaborate if we don't have deep levels of trust. You know what I mean? And so oftentimes people will gather, and on Monday they say, we want to do whatever. And then they'll create all these offices and they'll go forward, but they don't spend any time to get to know each other. You know what I mean? And so then 3 months later, the whole thing gets broken apart. You know what I mean? And then someone else 2 months later will say, hey, remember that time when we got together? And we'll say hey, let's do it again. You know what I mean? And so ultimately, we want the strength of our connection to be so powerful that no external force can break us apart. You know what I mean? And that's how we have the sustainability of our movements.
I think that's creating possibilities within, and also is about also building integrity when those on leadership positions or those with the gifts, they do not use those gifts to suppress others in the movement and so off. There's a challenge we have, particularly in Africa, where those change makers or social movement builders are often targeted by government agencies and authoritative regimes. What advice can you give so that we avoid such kind of things?
Yeah, I think, in different contexts, it can happen in different ways, I think there's something to decentralization that when you have one primary leader, you're kind of putting a target on them, that, you strike this leader and then everybody will crumble. But I don't know if you ever heard the spoke in the wheel. So when you're organizing networks, right? The spoke in the wheel, you would have one person in the center that has relationships with everybody, and then if that person gets sick, if anything happens, the whole thing falls apart because only one person or one organization was holding it, right? But if you have multiple people connecting together, it weaves this thing that enables the durability of the movement and the shared the decision making. You know what I mean? So I think decentralization is the key.
Are we talking about distributed leadership, or we are talking about how can you build that kind of distributed leadership with a co-leading a vision of movement? How can you do this?
Distributed leadership.
How can you do that? And how is this practical in our case?
Yeah, sometimes in distributive leadership, I think it comes down to decision making, and how people make decisions, how people are interacting with each other, and connecting together. Yeah, I'm kind of tired. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Thank you. I think it's about allowing the idea to define the movement, and also making it easier for the new entrants to join the movement, and not having a lot of classification that one is more knowledgeable, one has more experience than the other in the sector, and making it easier for the people to move with it. Finally, I just wanted to ask one question. You've been in the movement sector for quite some time, and what drives the movement? What drives the movement, really, from the history?
I think ultimately it's about not accepting the unacceptable. That like there's a discontentment with what people are experiencing now.
Yes.
That like, and knowing that like what we're experiencing now does not have to be what it is.
Yes.
It's like knowing that another world is possible. And then from there, organizing in a small way, in a bigger way. But I think ultimately it's being driven to know that what we're experiencing now is not what we always have to experience. And especially at this point in human history, where it feels that like we're at this point of like great decision. You know what I mean? Are we gonna love? Are we gonna choose love as our foundation? Or are we gonna operate in fear? Are we gonna be interdependent? Or are we gonna still live inside of this individualism or separateness? And I think like what are we doing today to honor 12 generations from now? That like 12 generations from now we'll look back on this time and be like, I appreciate the foundation they laid to allow me to be into whatever it is now. And so to me, like that is the drive. You know what I mean? Because each generation builds off of the previous generation, and each generation lays the brick for future generations.
Thank you for that insightful experience and sharings. There's something which I must say that we want to emphasize to our people, that in the world today, the systems are broken. Most of the systems are broken, and they need to fix it. And to do that, we need a lot of courage, particularly from the change makers. And besides the courage, there's a lot of challenges coming on board. The body crisis of climate change, volatility in our economies. We have failing education and health systems. A lot of issues, international conflict. So what advice can we give our change makers so that they don't give up, so that they can have some energy to drive this agenda of social justice and building solidarity among the people across the world? What advice can you give them?
For me, I would, two things that's coming to mind. One is, I know it appears that we're on the defense. And, for some of us, it's been on the defense for all these years. But like we're in a new season right now. And so actually we're on the offense, because like those that believe in love, human dignity, there's like a wind that is developing right now. And so it's like how to see ourselves on the offense. And dang, I lost it. What was the second one?
I think there's something also we must agree that in movement building we must embrace the power of creativity. The power of creativity and songs, poetry, and even cartoons have become so critical in pushing our movement. Do you have an example that you can demonstrate where our creative arts have used creativity to push the agenda in movement building?
Yeah, I think art and movement is critical. You know what I mean? And one song we bind on is Exodus.
The Exodus, this song.
And so, Exodus by Bob Marley talks about the movement of Jah people. And so, but I think the power of song is that like when we agree upon a song, how do we then make that the ground through which we aspire to achieve. Instead of just leaving it as a song that we all love and resonates and will sing together, we know all the lyrics to, but we don't actually try to embody it, you know what I mean, and try to like live it out, you know what I mean. And so to me, like that is a huge part of this.
I think it is good also for the movement people that think deep beyond the rhythms of the song, so that we get the messaging in those songs. As movement builders, what final word can you give? What final word can you give as an encouragement for us to continue doing the work we do in the building movement?
Yeah, you know, I would say forward ever, backwards never, you know? And so in Ethiopia, we would say kas bakas, you know, slowly, the egg begins to walk, you know? And so I think like keep moving, keep striving. And the more that we create a clear example of what is possible, the more people will be galvanized and gathered to want to join us, you know? And so, I think stay encouraged, you know, and keep pressing towards higher ground. And I think there's something else that like, oftentimes like what is our evolution? Meaning that like, since we have a shared future and we have a common humanity, like how are we like stepping deeper into our humanity as a way to create change? You know what I mean? Because like as we relate to each other differently, that's how you build new systems and structures. You know what I mean? Because systems are held up by relationships. You know, and so it's like knowing the power that we have to build new futures by just changing how we see ourselves and seeing each other, that we can recognize that like what impacts you impacts me, and what impacts me impacts you, you know? And so like, how do we like build this space together?
With the power of humanity, with the power of Ubuntu, and also realizing that we need each other to solidify and work together to achieve what we want. Thank you very much, Amar. Thank you for the best you've done. And for the few, I think we welcome you again for the Community Power Masterclass series. We welcome you once again. Welcome. Enjoy yourself.
Good thing.